1st, 1943, USS Independence, Pacific Ocean. Through the crystalline morning air above Marcus Island, Warrant Officer Toshiuki Sueda led his division of Mitsubishi A6M Zeros with the confidence born from 9 confirmed victories. His wingmen maintained tight formation as they climbed to intercept the American fighters spotted approaching from the carrier task force below. Sueda had perfected a killing maneuver against the lumbering F4F Wildcats that had dominated American carrier decks for 2 years. The tactic was elegant in its simplicity. When a Wildcat latched onto his tail, he would enter a climbing loop. The American fighter, underpowered and heavy, would stall halfway through the maneuver and fall away helplessly. Sueda would then wing over and destroy his opponent with cannon fire. He had used this technique successfully 4 times in the past 6 months. As the American formation materialized through the scattered clouds, Sueda identified what he assumed were more Wildcats. The silhouettes looked similar, the barrel-shaped fuselages and broad wings characteristic of Grumman's design. He positioned his Zero for the attack, rolling in behind one of the American fighters with textbook precision. The American pilot saw him coming. Predictably, the Wildcat turned hard, trying to shake the pursuit. Sueda smiled behind his oxygen mask. This young pilot would learn the fatal lessons so many others had learned before him. He waited patiently as the American fighter maneuvered, then executed his climbing loop. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The American fighter followed him into the climb. Not only followed, but accelerated, closing the distance with shocking speed. Sueda's Zero reached the apex of the loop, hanging momentarily in the thin air as physics demanded. The American fighter did not slow, did not stall, did not fall away. Instead, 6 heavy machine guns opened fire. The American's name was Ensign Robert Duncan, and he was flying something Sueda had never encountered before. Not a Wildcat, but its bigger, deadlier brother. The Grumman F6F Hellcat had arrived in the Pacific Theater. Sueda's Zero disintegrated under the concentrated firepower. His wingmen watched in horror as their leader's aircraft transformed into burning fragments falling toward the ocean below. Duncan pulled through his attack, his 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine barely straining from the maneuver that would have destroyed a Wildcat's chances. What Warrant Officer Sueda experienced in his final seconds of life was the beginning of Japanese naval aviation's systematic destruction. From that moment on, September 1st, 1943, when Hellcats from Independence shot down their first enemy aircraft, a Kawanishi H-8K flying boat, the balance of air power in the Pacific shifted irrevocably. Within months, Japanese pilots would speak of the Hellcat with a mixture of fear and hopelessness that contrasted sharply with their earlier confidence against American fighters. The mathematics of Japanese defeat were already programmed into the Hellcat's design. 6 AN-M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each loaded with 400 rounds of ammunition. Total firepower, 2,400 rounds capable of firing at a combined rate of 4,800 rounds per minute. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area. Against the lightly built Zero, which achieved its legendary maneuverability by sacrificing armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, this firepower was devastating. But the Hellcat represented more than just heavy armament. It embodied American industrial philosophy applied to carrier aviation. Where the Japanese had created an exquisite but fragile weapon in the Zero, optimized for dogfighting performance at the expense of everything else, Grumman had built a fighter that prioritized pilot survival, ease of production, and versatility. The Hellcat could absorb punishment that would have turned a Zero into a fireball, then return to its carrier for repairs that could be completed by mechanics with minimal specialized training. The development of the Hellcat had begun in June 1941 when the Navy asked Grumman to create an improved version of the F4F Wildcat. The Wildcat had been designed in the 1930s and was showing its age against the nimble Japanese fighters. While the Vought F4U Corsair was intended to be the Wildcat's replacement, development problems with the Corsair prompted Grumman to pursue what would become an entirely new aircraft. On June 26, 1942, the prototype XF6F3 made its first flight. Just 14 months later, in August 1943, operational Hellcats were flying combat missions from carrier decks. This extraordinary timeline from drawing board to combat deployment was itself a demonstration of American industrial capacity that Japan could never match. Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, already a Medal of Honor recipient and experienced combat pilot, had toured the Grumman factory in April 1942 to provide input on the Hellcat's development. His insights from dogfighting zeros in his Wildcat shaped critical design decisions. The cockpit was mounted higher in the fuselage for better visibility. The forward fuselage sloped slightly to the engine cowling, giving Hellcat pilots a view that Wildcat pilots could only dream about. When President Roosevelt asked O'Hare what was needed in a new naval fighter, his response was succinct: something that would go upstairs faster. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine answered that requirement emphatically. This 18-cylinder, two-row, air-cooled radial power plant produced 2,000 horsepower, driving a three-bladed Hamilton Standard propeller 13 feet in diameter. The Hellcat could reach a maximum speed of 380 miles per hour at optimal altitude, outpacing the Zero's 335 miles per hour. More importantly, the Hellcat maintained superior performance at high altitudes where the Zero's capabilities degraded significantly. The first production F6F-3 flew in October 1942. By January 1943, Fighting Squadron 9 received the first Hellcats delivered to the USS Essex. The aircraft entered combat on August 31, 1943, when VF-5, operating from the carrier Yorktown, participated in the Marcus Island raid. Within weeks, the Hellcat's superiority over Japanese aircraft became undeniable. The engagement over Tarawa on November 23 and 24, 1943, provided dramatic evidence of what American pilots now possessed. Hellcats engaged Japanese Zeros in furious dogfights, claiming 30 enemy aircraft destroyed for the loss of only one F6F. The lopsided exchange ratio shocked Japanese commanders who had grown accustomed to their fighters' dominance in the early war years. On December 4, 1943, in the Kwajalein area, 91 Hellcats fought 50 Zeros in the first large-scale air battle featuring the new American fighter. When the combat ended, 28 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed. The Americans lost 2 Hellcats. The kill ratio was 14-1. Japanese pilots who survived these encounters returned to their bases with reports that seemed incredible to their superiors. The Americans had fielded a fighter that matched or exceeded the Zero in virtually every performance category except low-speed turning radius. What made these statistics even more devastating for Japan was that they represented just the beginning of a technological and training gap that would only widen. By mid-1943, Allied pilots were noticing a sharp decline in Japanese flying skills. The cream of Japanese naval aviation, the superbly trained veterans who had terrorized the Pacific in 1941 and 1942, had been systematically destroyed in the grinding attrition of Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands campaigns. The Japanese pilot training system could not replace these losses with similarly skilled aviators. In 1937, out of 1,500 sailors who applied for the pilot trainee system, only 70 were accepted and 25 graduated. This emphasis on quality over quantity had produced extraordinary pilots, but the system lacked the capacity to train replacements at the rate combat demanded. When war broke out in December 1941, the average Japanese Navy pilot had logged 700 hours of flying time. By January 1945, that figure had plummeted to 275 hours. Replacement pilots entering combat by late 1944 often had as little as 40 hours of total flight time. They faced American pilots who averaged 500 to 525 hours of training, much of it in advanced fighters identical to or similar to the aircraft they would fly in combat. The contrast in training quality told only part of the story. Japan's industrial base could not sustain the production rates necessary to compete with American manufacturing. At peak production in March 1945, Grumman's Bethpage factory on Long Island was completing one Hellcat every hour around the clock. The factory was so efficient that some of the first F6Fs were being built inside while construction crews were still completing the building itself. Between 1942 and 1945, Grumman produced 12,075 Hellcats. This staggering output dwarfed Japanese aircraft production. More significantly, every single Hellcat was equipped with sophisticated electronics, armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and weapon systems that represented the cutting edge of aviation technology. Japan produced approximately 10,000 Zeros during the entire war, but by 1944, manufacturing quality was in steep decline as skilled workers were drafted and materials became scarce. The Hellcat's rugged construction made it extraordinarily difficult to shoot down. Armor protection included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, half-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around critical systems. The 250-gallon self-sealing fuel tank was mounted in the fuselage, protected from enemy fire. Even the oil tank and oil cooler were armored. Captain Eric Brown, the Royal Navy's chief naval test pilot, flew captured Zeros and compared them to Allied fighters. His assessment was blunt. The Zero had ruled the roost totally and was the finest fighter in the world until mid-1943. After that, the balance shifted decisively. The Zero achieved its remarkable performance through dangerous compromises. It lacked hydraulic boosting for ailerons and rudder, making high-speed maneuvers difficult. The control surfaces stiffened dramatically above 260 miles per hour, robbing the Zero of its legendary maneuverability at the high speeds where Hellcats excelled. Most critically, the Zero's lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks made it a death trap when hit by heavy machine gun fire. American pilots quickly learned that while the Zero could dodge their bullets through violent maneuvering, one good burst was usually sufficient to destroy it completely. The lightweight aluminum-zinc alloy construction that gave the Zero its exceptional range and agility also ensured it would burn fiercely when punctured. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who survived the war with over 60 victories, encountered Hellcats on June 24, 1944, while flying from Iwo Jima. Sakai mistakenly identified a formation of 15 F6F Hellcats as friendly Japanese aircraft and approached them. When he realized his error, he found himself trapped. 4 Hellcats latched onto his tail. Despite being one of Japan's most skilled pilots, Sakai barely escaped. He used every trick he had learned in years of combat, diving and weaving through the Hellcats' attacks, exploiting his intimate knowledge of the Zero's capabilities. He managed to return to his airfield, but the experience left him shaken. The Hellcats had been faster, better armed, and flown by pilots who demonstrated tactical sophistication that belied the American reputation for crude, direct tactics. The Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19, 20th, 1944, demonstrated the complete transformation in Pacific air. Power. American pilots dubbed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and the nickname was chillingly appropriate. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded the Japanese mobile fleet, which included 5 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers, 5 battleships, 12 cruisers, and 22 destroyers. His air groups numbered approximately 430 carrier-based aircraft, supplemented by land-based planes from Guam and other islands. Opposing him was Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher's Task Force 58, with 15 carriers deploying 956 aircraft, including hundreds of Hellcats. The numerical disparity was significant, but not overwhelming. What made the battle one-sided was the qualitative gap between the opposing forces. Japanese pilots launching their attacks on June 19th faced a coordinated defense that represented the full integration of American technological advantages. Radar detected incoming raids at extreme range, giving Hellcat pilots time to position themselves at optimal altitude. Fighter direction officers vectored interceptors precisely onto target coordinates. The Japanese aircraft, flying in large, poorly coordinated formations, were systematically slaughtered. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander Vratsiu of Fighting Squadron 16, flying from the USS Lexington, shot down 6 Japanese aircraft in a single mission that day. When he landed back on Lexington's deck, photographers captured him, holding up 6 fingers to signify his kills. His expression showed not jubilation, but a kind of stunned awareness of the massacre he had participated in. Over 2 days of fighting, Japanese naval aviation was effectively destroyed as a fighting force. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost approximately 600 aircraft, 400 of them carrier-based. American losses totaled 123 aircraft, with 80 of those lost to operational causes rather than enemy action. Many pilots ditched when they ran out of fuel after the extended range strike on the evening of June 20th, when Mitcher famously ordered all ships to turn on their lights to guide his pilots home. The kill ratio in aerial combat approached 20-1. This wasn't combat. This was systematic execution. Ensign Robert Duncan, the pilot who had shot down Warrant Officer Sueda back in September 1943, became the first ace of the USS Yorktown on February 16, 1944, when he claimed his fifth victory. He would end the war with 7 confirmed kills, all scored in Hellcats. His experience was replicated thousands of times across the Pacific theater. Young American pilots with extensive training climbed into rugged, powerful fighters and faced Japanese opponents flying obsolete aircraft with minimal preparation. The disparity in experience and equipment produced some extraordinary individual achievements. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Captain David McCampbell and his wingman, Ensign Roy Rushing, spotted a formation of 60 Japanese aircraft approaching the American fleet. Despite being outnumbered 30-1, the 2 Hellcat pilots attacked. McCampbell shot down 9 enemy aircraft in that single mission, 7 Zeros and 2 Oscars. Rushing destroyed 6. Together, they scattered the Japanese formation so thoroughly that the bombers never reached their targets. McCampbell would end the war as the Navy's leading ace with 34 victories, all scored in Hellcats. His achievement stood as testimony to what a well-trained pilot could accomplish in a superior aircraft. By late 1944, Japanese aviation was so depleted that the military leadership began organizing kamikaze units. The decision to employ suicide tactics reflected not just desperation, but mathematical reality. Japanese pilots no longer possessed the skill to attack American ships conventionally and survive. Training a pilot to take off, navigate to a target, and crash his aircraft into it required far less time than training him for aerial combat. The kamikaze attacks, while terrifying and occasionally effective, represented an admission of defeat in the air war. Young men with minimal training climbed into aircraft that were often obsolete or damaged, loaded with explosives, and flew one-way missions. Many never reached their targets, shot down by the combat air patrols of Hellcats that maintained continuous coverage over American task forces. The Big Blue Blanket, as American pilots called this defensive umbrella, stretched 60 miles out from the carriers. Japanese aircraft attempting to penetrate it faced multiple layers of Hellcats operating at different altitudes, coordinated by fighter direction officers using radar. The system was so effective that by early 1945, Japanese air attacks on American ships had become desperate, futile gestures rather than serious military operations. F6F5N night fighters, equipped with radar, began operations in late 1943. These specialized variants hunted Japanese aircraft in darkness, eliminating the last refuge where Japanese pilots might have enjoyed tactical advantage. The AN/APS-6 radar allowed Hellcat pilots to detect, track, and intercept enemy aircraft without visual contact. Japanese bombers attempting night raids found themselves under attack from an enemy they couldn't see until the tracers from .650 caliber machine guns illuminated their final moments. The Hellcat's versatility extended beyond air-to-air combat. The F6SV5 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs on underwing racks, or 6 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. In the fighter-bomber role, Hellcats dropped 6,503 tons of bombs on Japanese installations and launched 60,000 rockets against ground targets and shipping. The same aircraft that dominated the skies could also provide devastating close air support for amphibious invasions. American industrial capacity ensured that Hellcat losses, when they occurred, were immediately replaced. A pilot who ditched due to mechanical failure or combat damage would be back in the cockpit of a new F6F within days. Japanese. Pilots who lost their aircraft often found themselves reassigned to ground duties simply because no replacement fighters were available. The simplicity of the Hellcat's design facilitated not just production, but field maintenance. Ensign Byron Robinson, an aircraft maintenance officer aboard USS Franklin, expressed his admiration for the F6F's serviceability. "I dearly loved the F6F. I could keep almost 90% of those aircraft in the air. It was a very simple airplane to maintain because there was little in the way of a hydraulic system. This operational readiness rate far exceeded what Japanese maintenance crews could achieve with their increasingly complex aircraft and dwindling spare parts inventory. By 1945, many Japanese fighters sat grounded not from combat damage, but from lack of replacement components or fuel. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots cannot be overstated. Men who had trained for years, who had survived early war battles, who considered themselves among the elite warriors of the empire, now faced combat with the knowledge that they were likely to die. The Hellcat had become not just an aircraft, but a symbol of inevitable defeat. Interrogation reports from captured Japanese pilots revealed the depth of their demoralization. One veteran pilot, asked to assess the Hellcat, responded with bitter honesty. With its speed, armament, and armored protection, the Grumman F6F Hellcat was a rude awakening for the Imperial Japanese pilots. We were told our Zeros were invincible. We believed our training made us superior. The Hellcat destroyed both those illusions in less than a year. By the end of the war, Hellcat pilots had achieved an overall kill ratio of 19-1 in aerial combat. The F6F accounted for 75% of all aerial victories recorded by the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, despite entering service well into the war. This translated to 5,223 enemy aircraft destroyed in just over 2 years of combat operations. 307 Navy pilots became aces flying Hellcats, making the F6F the prime ace-maker aircraft in American inventory. The statistical dominance was so complete that it borders on the absurd. In the last 8 months of the Pacific War, the Navy lost only 2 dive bombers and 5 torpedo planes to Japanese aircraft in aerial combat. The Hellcat umbrella had made American carrier strike operations virtually immune to air attack. The Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm received 1,263 Hellcats under Lend-Lease and operated them in the Far East, Mediterranean, and off Norway. While British Hellcat units didn't achieve the spectacular kill ratios of their American counterparts, largely due to fewer opportunities for air combat, British pilots praised the aircraft's handling characteristics and ruggedness. One Fleet Air Arm officer continued flying his Hellcat until 1953, 8 years after the war ended, testimony to both the aircraft's durability and the affection it inspired. When Navy evaluators conducted comparative tests of Allied and captured Axis fighters late in the war, the Hellcat ranked at the top in most categories. This achievement was remarkable considering the compressed 18-month development period from prototype to combat deployment. German and Japanese engineers who examined captured Hellcats after the war were stunned by the sophisticated yet practical design, the quality of manufacturing, and the integration of systems that their own industries could not replicate. The final irony of the Hellcat saga lies in its rapid obsolescence. By 1945, jet aircraft were already appearing in limited numbers. The F-8F Bearcat, Grumman's next-generation piston fighter, began replacing Hellcats in frontline squadrons. By 1950, most Hellcats had been relegated to training roles or Naval Reserve units. The last Navy Hellcats left service in 1954, just 11 years after the type's combat debut. Yet, in that brief operational window, the Hellcat had accomplished what few weapon systems ever achieve: complete dominance over its intended opponent. Japanese naval aviation never recovered from the losses inflicted during the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Every subsequent battle saw the disparity widen, as American pilots gained experience and Japanese pilots died faster than replacements could be trained. The destruction of Warrant Officer Toshiuki Sueda on September 1, 1943, had not been an isolated incident or random misfortune. It was the first visible manifestation of a systematic technological and industrial superiority that would grind Japanese aviation into irrelevance. Sueda's confident smile, his mastery of the climbing loop tactic, his 9 previous victories, all became meaningless the moment Ensign Duncan's Hellcat followed him through that climb without stalling. The story of the Hellcat and its domination of Japanese aviation is ultimately a story about industrial war. The finest pilots in the world, flying elegant but fragile aircraft, could not overcome an enemy that deployed good pilots and rugged, powerful machines backed by unlimited industrial capacity. Every Hellcat destroyed was replaced within days. Every American pilot lost was replaced by another with extensive training. Japan could replace neither its aircraft nor its pilots at sufficient rates. When Japanese military leadership assessed their situation in summer 1945, facing invasion of the home islands, they calculated that American air superiority was absolute. The kamikazes had inflicted damage but could not stop the American advance. The remnants of conventional Japanese fighter units were reduced to flying obsolete aircraft with pilots who had minimal training and no hope of survival. The atomic bombs that ended the war in August 1945 spared those young Japanese pilots from participating in the suicidal defense operations being planned. But the outcome had already been determined in the skies over the Pacific in 1943 and 1944, when Hellcats systematically destroyed Japanese air power and made American victory inevitable. Today, only a handful of flyable Hellcats remain. Aviation enthusiasts at air shows watch these vintage fighters perform graceful aerobatics, their 2,000 horsepower engines roaring as they climb and turn with an ease that belies their 70-year-old design. What the crowds see is a beautiful aircraft executing impressive maneuvers. What veterans remember is something different, a weapon that, for a critical period in history, changed the balance of power in the Pacific and shortened a brutal war. The pilots who flew Hellcats described the aircraft with affection bordering on love. Captain David McCampbell called it an outstanding fighter plane, praising its rugged construction and stable gun platform. Countless others echoed his sentiments, grateful for the armor that protected them, the power that gave them tactical options, and the reliability that brought them home. The Japanese pilots who faced Hellcats and survived remember it differently. They recall an opponent that negated every advantage their aircraft once possessed, flown by pilots who were well-trained and well-equipped, backed by a nation whose industrial might they had catastrophically underestimated. The Hellcat was not just superior to the Zero in specifications. It represented the full weight of American industrial mobilization applied to the problem of air superiority. From September 1, 1943, when Ensign Duncan shot down Warrant Officer Sueda, to August 15, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, the Grumman F6F Hellcat rewrote the rules of carrier aviation and demolished Japanese air power with ruthless efficiency. The Zero had been the finest carrier fighter in the world in 1942. By 1944, it was an obsolete aircraft flown by inexperienced pilots facing an enemy they could not defeat. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Hellcat was faster, better armed, better protected, easier to produce, easier to maintain, and available in numbers that Japan could never match. Japanese pilots couldn't handle it because no amount of individual skill or courage could overcome such comprehensive disadvantage. The sky belonged to America, and the Hellcat made sure everyone knew it. If you found this deep dive into the Hellcat's dominance over Japanese aviation fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from World War II. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next upload, where we'll continue exploring the weapons, battles, and warriors that shaped history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.